Hey learners, this is Sam from Target Schooling, and in this session of the video we're going to talk about the wrist joint that is also called as radiocarpal joint. Why radiocarpal joint? Because it is formed between the radius bone and the carpal bones. The ulna is not involved in the radiocarpal joint. Remember this one, in wrist joint or radiocarpal joint, ulna is not involved. So this is the point where wrist joint is located. We have got everything to discuss, and what we are going to discuss in the wrist joint, first of all, we're going to discuss about the articulation, then type, capsule, ligaments, synovial membranes, its movements, and its relations, to the different muscles and, to the nerves in the end. But let's talk about the radiocarpal joint and wrist joint. So what is wrist joint or radiocarpal joint? So it's actually a joint that is formed between the distal end. What I mean by the distal end, I mean this ending end, the distal end of the radius and the articular disc. There's an articular disc. There's a disc at the ulnar side. I can't show you that, but there's a disc. Ulna is not involved, but there's a disc which is actually forming this joint. So what we can say, between the distal end of the radius and the articular disc above and below, we have got the scaphoid. Already we have talked about it. We have got scaphoid, lunate, and tricutal bones. So it is formed between the radius and three bones below. So this is all about the basic of the wrist joint. So the proximal articular surface forms an ellipsoid concave surface. So what I mean by the ellipsoid concave surface and what I mean by the proximal surface. So what happens? This area, this is radius. So you can view this radius as in this image. So this is in the pink color. I'm showing how the radius is looking. So this is the radius. All right, this is the shape of radius, which is actually forming a concave shape like this one. This is a concave shape. So this is radius forming the ellipsoid concave shape, and this is the ulna. This is how, I'm sorry, not ulna, carpus. This is how the carpus is, forming the convex ellipsoid shape. So what I mean by the ellipsoid shape is kind of a, if you view this shape in 3D form, like in 3D form, you can have a picture of the ellipsoid shape. So we will talk about the ellipsoid shape later and why it is called ellipsoid joint in just a second. So what happens? What happens? This concave surface, which the concave ellipsoid concave surface, which is formed by the radius and which is adopted by the distal convex surface of these all bones together. So they actually form the wrist joint. So this is how this. If you picture this, my hand. This is actually formed by the radius, and if you fit up these other bones into it, so they all together form the wrist joint. So this is a convex shaped formed by the carpal bones, and this is a concave formed surface, or you can say ellipsoid concave surface formed by the radius, and it fits into it, and it's easy to have abduction, adduction, extension, flexion, but we cannot rotate it because it hits the sides. We're going to talk about the movements later on, but just have a picture why we're calling it the ellipsoid joint, because of the ellipsoid shape and how the ellipsoid shape is located and how the other movements are possible. Now let's talk about the type of joint. So this is also a synovial ellipsoid joint, nothing to detail about it, and we have also got a capsule which actually encloses the joint and is attached above to the distal end of the radius and ulna. Remember this one. The joint is not formed between the ulna is not taking part in the joint, but the capsule is also, but the capsule is attached to the ulna. So what you can say, the radius and ulna are actually the capsule forms is on the distal end of the radius and ulna. It's attached over here, and on the proximal, and on the other side it's attached to the proximal surface of the carpal bones, not the distal, because we have got two rows. The distal row is not involved, and the capsule is not going to attach to the distal rows. It's only going to be attached on the proximal row of these bones. All right. Now let's talk about the ligaments. So we have got actually 4 ligaments in wrist joint. Remember, there are only 4 ligaments. So what are the 4 ligaments? We have got anterior ligament, We have got posterior ligament, we have got medial ligament, and we have got lateral ligament. So where are they located? If you're talking about the anteriorly, so this is how my hands is showing anterior. So we have got one ligament is anteriorly on the anterior side. We have got another ligament on posteriorly on the posterior side. We have got another ligament which is on the lateral side. We know that thumb shows the lateral side, so there's a radius. So there's a lateral ligament over here, and we have got medial ligament on the medial side of the wrist joint. So what happens? The anterior, remember this one thing, anterior and posterior ligaments strengthen the capsule. If you're asking in an OSP, remember if they ask you what strengthen more, the wrist joint, so you'll be saying anterior and posterior ligament. But the medial ligament, which is actually attached to the styloid process of the ulna, there's missing medial side, there's a styloid process, and the medial ligament is attached to the styloid process of the ulna, and it's on the tricutal bone. So this is the tricutal bone. It's attached over here to the tricutal bone. This is the medial ligament, and the lateral ligament is actually attached to the styloid process of radius. So this is the styloid process of the radius, and on the other side is attached to the scaphoid process, scaphoid bone. So we have talked about that these bones early on by this formula SLTP. So which was Sam looks too pretty. So this is how you can remember the scaphoid bone, which is on the lateral side. So this is all about the ligaments. We have got 4 ligaments: anterior, posterior, medial, lateral. All is this. Another membrane we have got, another thing we have got over here is the synovial membrane. So synovial membrane is actually covers the capsule. It secretes synovial fluid. It actually gives an extra lubrication to this joint. So nothing to detail about it. And now let's talk about the nerve supply. So there are 2 important nerves which supply wrist joint. You don't have to worry about many nerves, anything new. There is nothing about it. Only 2 nerves. What are those nerves? Anterior interosseous nerve, number 1. Remember this one. Anterior interosseous nerve. And the number 2 is the deep branch of the radial nerve. Not radial nerve itself. Never say that radial nerve is actually taking part in the wrist joint. But you have to say the deep branch of the radial nerve is actually taking part in the wrist joint. So this is all about the nerve supply. So we have talked about the articulation, how the bones are. We have talked about the types, which was synovial ellipsoid joint. We have talked about the capsule. We have talked about the ligaments. We have talked about the synovial membrane, and we have talked about the nerve supply. Now let's talk about the movements. So there are only 5 possible movements in the wrist joint. Remember this. If somebody asking you how many possible movements are there in the wrist joint, you will be simply saying, putting your fingers like this, opening up your finger and thumb, and saying 5. There are only 5 movements possible. What are those? It's an flexion, like this is the flexion, extension, adduction, and abduction. These are the 4 of them. Adduction, abduction, like moving with the hand, abduction, flexion, extension, and what is the last one? It's the circumduction. So this is the circumduction. What is circumduction? It's a combination of all those 4 movements. What are all those 4 movements? Adduction, abduction, flexion, and extension. All those combined together form a circumduction. But there is no rotation. Remember this. Most of the teachers ask you in the OSP and in your Viva that why the rotation is not possible. So your simple answer would be because of the ellipsoid shape of these carpus bone, which are forming the ellipsoid shape. Because of that, and because of this ellipsoid shape, the rotation is not possible. Why? Why is that not possible? So the simple answer would be like this. Consider my hand again, repeating the old lecture again. Consider this hand. This is the radius, which is forming the concave surface, and you're putting in the convex surface of the carpus bone. So this is the convex ellipsoid. What happens? And rotation, it is must that the area you are going to rotate should be circular, and the ball should fit in. So it's not a ball and socket joint, which is on the shoulder joint, but it's something like this one, ellipsoid. If you know what I mean by the ellipsoid shape, it looks something like this. If you see it, like you are squeezing a ball and it's becoming like an egg. So it's something like an egg. It's an ellipsoid. So what happened? An ellipsoid, you can abduct, adduct, extend, flex, but you cannot rotate, because when you rotate the joint, it's actually going to hit the walls on the sides. So it's not, the rotation is not possible. But if they are asking you, if the rotation is not possible, they will ask you again, then what I'm doing this one, why this motion is possible, why this movement is possible, you will be simply saying it's because there is a supination and pronation. Like supination means bringing the palmar side upward, and pronation bringing the palmar side downward. So this is supination, pronation. It's because of the bones of the radius and ulna. This is only possible because radius and ulna are, the supination and pronation is only possible by that. It's not rotation of the wrist joint. So this is all about the movements of the wrist joint, or you can say radiocarpal joints. Now let's talk about there are also muscles involved, but you have to get through the muscles and have just a review, because extensor, there are extensor muscles which extend, flexor muscles looking on the thigh. But we have got the adductor. There is only one adductor. Actually, there are two adductor muscles. There is flexor and extensor carpi ulnaris. That's it. Extensor and flexor carpi ulnaris actually adduct our wrist joint, help in the adduction. Now, aside from this main wrist joint, we are going to talk about the important relations. So I have made another diagram, easy way to remember these one. So these are the relations of the wrist joint to different muscles, nerves, and arteries. All right. So what are relations? So relations mean it's something like what is located to the anterior side of the wrist joint, to the posterior side of the wrist joint, on the medial side, which is on the thumbs, this is the medial side to the little finger, and to the lateral side, which is towards the thumb. So now let's first talk about the medial side, this one. So on the medial side, we have got the posterior cutaneous branch of ulnar nerve. We have got posterior cutaneous nerve, branch of ulnar nerve over here on the wrist joint, and on the lateral side we have got the radial artery, which can be palpated in the snuff box. All right, in the snuff box we can palpate the radial artery over here. All right. So this is on the lateral side, and on the posterior side we have got different extensor muscles. On the anterior side we have also got different muscles. So we have on the anterior side we have got the flexor digitorum profundus, superficial, because their tendons are passing through the wrist joint. So we would say on anterior side these tendons pass over the wrist joint or anterior to the wrist joint. So flexor digitorum profundus, also flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor pollicis longus, flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, median nerve, and ulnar nerve. Remember this one, this is very important. Median nerve and ulnar nerve are very important. If somebody asking where they're moving, you would say anterior to the wrist joint, ulnar and median nerve are passing. But on the posterior side of the wrist joint, you would say the tendons of the extensor digitorum, extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor digitorum brevis, extensor indicis, sorry, it's not brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor pollicis longus plus extensor pollicis brevis, extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, extensor digiti minimi, and finally we have got the abductor pollicis longus. So these are the relations of different muscles, nerves, and arteries compared to the wrist joint, or also called the radiocarpal joint. So this is all about the wrist joint. I make sure I have cleared each and everything that was related to wrist joint. If there's any question, please do ask in our comments, and please make sure to be with us and keep visiting Tiger Schooling.